No nanny ever liked this child, but when this one arrived, everything changed. No nanny could stay in that house for very long. Some gave up on the first day, others lasted 2, 3 at most, all left with the same justification: the child was cold, apathetic, inaccessible. Some said there was something dark in that still gaze. Others claimed there was no possible connection with someone who didn't even look them in the eye. But the real reason was never spoken aloud. The truth was that almost all of them left feeling they had failed, and nobody liked to fail in front of a child. The house was in an affluent and secluded neighborhood in Cambridge, surrounded by high walls and electronic gates. From the outside, it looked like a tranquil refuge, but inside, the silence was oppressive. The owner of the house was Richard Alistair, a successful businessman in the construction industry. He had money, prestige, and a solid reputation in the corporate world. But none of this prepared him for the tragedy that shook his life 4 years earlier: the sudden loss of his wife, Isabella, in an accident that forever transformed the family's daily life. At the time, Leo, his only son, was just 2 years old. Since then, the boy had withdrawn in a way that defied any simple diagnosis. He didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't react to toys, conversations, or affection. He just looked out the window, almost always sitting in the same corner of his room. There were many attempts to reverse that state. Richard resorted to renowned psychologists, specialized therapists, caregivers recommended by high-end clinics, but one by one, they all failed. Leo rejected each new face, each voice, each attempt at closeness with a coldness that was frankly frightening. Over time, Richard stopped believing in resumes and diplomas. He began to receive candidates with less enthusiasm, already expecting the resignation call 2 days later. It was in this scenario, marked by frustration and silence, that Sylvia Vance appeared, a woman with a calm voice, a steady gaze, and gentle gestures. She brought no impressive certifications, only the experience of having cared for children in a small community daycare. Her approach did not include technical methods or conduct manuals. What she offered was just one request: that they give her time. Richard hesitated, as always, but something in her confident tone, almost too serene for that environment, made him agree. He wasn't expecting miracles. He simply gave in out of weariness. For the first 2 days, Leo maintained his pattern. He ignored Sylvia, didn't react to her presence, and retreated to his favorite corner by the window. Sylvia, in turn, didn't try to force anything. She didn't talk much. She just stayed there, nearby, sitting on the floor with a notebook or patiently observing the room. Sometimes she would leave small objects on Leo's bedside table: a carefully folded paper boat, a smooth grey stone, a red leaf fallen from the garden. She didn't explain, didn't insist. She just left them and moved away. On the 3rd day, something unusual happened. Leo picked up the little boat and put it inside a toy box he never used. The next day, he moved the box a few inches, positioning it closer to where Sylvia usually sat. She noticed the gesture but didn't react. The connection was being built in silence. By the end of the first week, Sylvia found a crumpled drawing on Leo's bedside table. In it, there was a female figure with her back turned, waspy long hair, and a flowing dress. There was no face, no name, but it was there. Sylvia didn't ask anything. She just left a new paper boat next to the drawing. During this period, Richard watched everything from afar, oscillating between contained hope and the fear of deluding himself. He had seen small improvements before, which faded with time. However, there was something different now. The house began to emit signs of life: a chair scraping, a light step, a whisper. Things that hadn't happened there for years. On a rainy afternoon, with a sudden power outage, Sylvia lit a candle and sat next to Leo without saying anything. He didn't move for long minutes, but then slowly he leaned his shoulder against her arm. It was the first spontaneous physical contact since his mother's loss. Richard, standing in the bedroom doorway, witnessed the scene unnoticed. His eyes welled up, but he remained silent. The following week, Leo uttered a word. It was almost inaudible, but Sylvia heard it clearly. He said, "Flower." Nobody understood the context. When Richard found out, he was confused. He tried to recall any past connection, but couldn't link the term to anything specific. The situation took a tense turn when Richard received an unexpected call from a former nanny who warned him about Sylvia. She said the caregiver was hiding things, that she wasn't who she claimed to be. Moved by doubt, Richard questioned Sylvia directly. She didn't defend herself with indignation. She simply asked for a day off to resolve personal matters. Richard consented, but felt the emptiness settle back into the house. Leo returned to his mutism. He didn't eat properly. He avoided the playroom. He started sleeping poorly. Sylvia returned the next day, and Leo ran to her, clutching the old drawing of the woman with her back turned. Richard watched in silence. That spoke louder than any argument. That night, while cleaning his wife's old office, Richard found a box of stored objects. Inside, there were letters and drawings. One of the letters, written by Isabella to baby Leo, ended with a curious phrase, "If one day I am no longer here, follow the gentle signs. They will guide you." The next morning, Sylvia mustered her courage and told her story. She said that years ago she had lost a daughter in similar circumstances. She spoke without drama, with the same serene tone as always. She explained that upon seeing Leo, she recognized the same silences, the same absences, and therefore decided to try to approach him with what she had learned through pain. Richard didn't answer, but that day, for the first time in 4 years, he invited Sylvia to sit at the dinner table with him and Leo. The relationship between the three began to change. Leo asked to play, to draw, to go out into the garden. One day, he asked to see his mother's room, something he had never done. He entered slowly, touched a few objects, looked at photos. Richard watched him with a heavy heart. In the midst of the silence, Leo looked at his father and just said, "Flower." It was the name Isabella used in her letters, an affectionate, intimate nickname that no one else knew. In the weeks that followed, Leo showed a growing interest in paper boats. He started making his own with simple folds. One day, during a walk in the park, he got lost for a few minutes. When Richard found him, Leo was standing by a lake, holding a little boat with the name Flower, written in shaky letters. The house was no longer the same. Neither was Leo, nor Richard, nor Sylvia. There was no magic. There was no instant cure. But the gentle signs were there, and they were being followed one by one. Richard began to realize that Sylvia's presence went beyond professional care. There was a dedication that surpassed the contract, a silent devotion that filled the empty corners of the house. He didn't know if it was gratitude, admiration, or something more complex beginning to form within him. He just knew that when she was around, the house breathed again. Sylvia, in turn, felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief at seeing Leo slowly returning to life. Guilt at knowing that part of that movement came from a wound still open within her. Her daughter, Eleanor, would have been Leo's age if she were still here. The pain had never completely gone away. It had simply found a new place to exist. And now, by caring for that quiet boy, Sylvia felt that her loss gained some meaning, but not everything was peaceful. The call Richard had received from the former nanny continued to echo in his mind. He hadn't forgotten. He had just stored it away. There was something in that woman's words that didn't fit. She spoke of Sylvia as if she knew secrets, as if there was a hidden story that needed to be revealed. Richard was not a man to leave doubts unanswered. So, without warning, he decided to investigate. He started discreetly. He asked a friend who worked in human resources to do a background check, nothing illegal, just a confirmation of the data Sylvia had provided. The reply came a week later. There were inconsistencies. The address she had given as her residence no longer existed. The community daycare where she said she had worked had closed its doors years ago, and her full name appeared in old records linked to a rural town in Suffolk, but without many details. Richard was disturbed, not because he suspected anything serious, but because he didn't understand why Sylvia would lie. She didn't seem like a dangerous person. On the contrary, she was the most transparent person he had ever known, but her transparency was emotional, not factual, and that started to bother him. One night, After Leo had fallen asleep, Richard called Sylvia for a conversation. He wasn't aggressive, just direct. He showed her the papers, explained what he had discovered, and asked, with a tired voice, why she had lied. Sylvia didn't avert her gaze. She took a deep breath and replied with her usual calm. She said she hadn't lied about who she was, only about where she had been. She explained that after losing Eleanor, her life had fallen apart. Her marriage dissolved, friends drifted away. She moved cities several times, trying to start over, but always carrying the weight of absence. When she saw the job advertisement at Richard's house, something pulled her in. She couldn't explain it. She just felt she needed to be there. Richard listened without interrupting. When she finished, he remained silent for long seconds. Then he simply said, "I lied too. Not to you, to myself. I pretended I was fine, that I could take care of Leo alone. But I wasn't. And I couldn't. You saved my son, and maybe you saved me too." Sylvia felt her eyes sting, but she didn't cry. She just nodded. In that moment, they both understood that they were united by something greater than an employment contract. They were united by pain, by loss, by the attempt to rebuild what had been broken. But the peace was fragile. A few days later, an unknown woman appeared at the front door. She introduced herself as Beatrice Caldwell, Isabella's sister. Richard was surprised. Isabella had never mentioned having a sister. Or perhaps she had, and he hadn't paid attention. The first years of marriage had been intense, full of work and career building. Conversations about family were rare. Beatrice entered the house with a firm, almost defiant posture. She said she had returned from abroad, where she had lived for years, and wanted to meet Leo. Richard didn't know how to react. He allowed the visit, but remained attentive. There was something in the way Beatrice looked at Sylvia that bothered him. It was a look of recognition, as if the two already knew each other. Leo, who had started interacting more with people, withdrew again in Beatrice's presence. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He just went back to the corner by the window and remained still. Sylvia tried to approach, but Beatrice interrupted her with a sharp comment. "Perhaps you should give him some space. The child needs it." Richard felt the tension in the air. He asked Beatrice to wait in the living room and took Sylvia to the kitchen. He asked if they knew each other. Sylvia hesitated, but then confirmed. "Yes, we know each other. But it was a long time ago, and it wasn't under good circumstances." Richard demanded more explanations, but Sylvia asked him to wait. She said she needed to talk to Beatrice first. He didn't like the answer, but agreed. He went back to the living room and found Beatrice looking at a photo of Isabella on the shelf. She held the frame with trembling hands, as if before something sacred. "What do you want here?" Richard asked, without beating around the bush. Beatrice turned slowly. "I want to help. Isabella was my sister. Leo is my nephew. I have a right to be here." Richard crossed his arms. "Isabella never spoke of you. Why?" Beatrice smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Because I left. Because we fought. Because I wasn't here when she needed me. And now I want to fix that." Richard didn't know if he believed her, but he also had no reason to distrust her, so he allowed her to stay for dinner. The meal was tense. Leo ate almost nothing. Sylvia barely spoke. Beatrice tried to start conversations, but the answers were short, evasive. When the night ended, Beatrice said goodbye, saying she would return the next day. After she left, Richard confronted Sylvia again. This time she told him everything. She explained that years ago she had worked in a hospital where Beatrice was also present, not as a doctor, but as a volunteer. The two met during a difficult period. Beatrice had just lost someone close and was fragile. Sylvia, who was also going through a complicated time, tried to help her, but Beatrice blamed her for something that was beyond her control. Since then, they had never spoken again. Richard remained silent, processing the information. Then he asked, "Could she be dangerous to Leo?" Sylvia shook her head. "I don't think so. But she carries a lot of pain. And pain can make people act unpredictably." Richard nodded. He decided he would be vigilant. He wouldn't allow anything to threaten the peace that, finally, was beginning to settle in the house. But fate had other plans. The next morning, Beatrice returned, and this time she wasn't alone. She brought with her a man who introduced himself as a lawyer. He handed Richard a document. It was a petition for shared custody. Beatrice was seeking legal rights over Leo, claiming to be Isabella's only living relative, and that the child needed a female family figure. Richard was furious. He tore up the paper and asked both of them to leave his house. Beatrice was unmoved. She just looked at him coldly and said, "This won't end here, Richard. Leo deserves to know his real family, not just strangers you hire." The words stung, because, deep down, Richard knew Beatrice was right about one thing. He had distanced himself from everything and everyone after Isabella's loss. He hadn't kept in touch with her family. He hadn't asked if there was anyone who wanted to be part of Leo's life. He had simply closed himself off in his grief and his son's silence. But now, with Beatrice forcing an abrupt entry, he felt that something was wrong. It wasn't about love or care. It was about control. And he wouldn't let anyone control Leo's life. Sylvia, who had watched everything silently, finally spoke. "Richard, I need to tell you something that might change everything." He looked at her, his heart pounding. "What is it?" Sylvia took a deep breath. "Beatrice isn't who you think she is, and Isabella didn't die the way they told you." Sylvia's words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Richard felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He could only grip the edge of the table, as if needing to anchor himself to something solid to keep from collapsing. Sylvia continued, her voice firm but laden with an old sorrow. "I didn't want to tell you like this. I didn't want you to find out this way. But Beatrice came back precisely because of this. She knows that I know, and now she's going to use it against you, against Leo, against everything we've built here." Richard finally found his voice. "What are you talking about? Isabella was in an accident. I was there. I saw the car. I saw the hospital. I saw everything." Sylvia shook her head slowly. "You saw what they showed you, but you didn't see what happened before. Isabella wasn't alone in that car. Richard, Beatrice was with her." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard felt blood pulsing in his temples. He sat down, his legs trembling. Beatrice was in the car. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because she got out earlier. They had argued. Isabella was going to meet Beatrice that night to resolve something serious, something that had been dragging on for years. But the conversation turned sour. Beatrice got out of the car a few blocks before the accident, and when it happened, she disappeared. She didn't show her face. She didn't give a statement. She simply vanished. Richard ran his hands over his face and trying to process everything. "How do you know this?" Sylvia approached, but maintained a respectful distance. "Because I was working at the hospital that night. Not as a doctor. I was a nursing assistant. And Beatrice showed up there, hours after the accident, completely distraught. She told me everything. She said she felt guilty, that she should have stayed in the car, that she should have stopped Isabella from leaving alone. She was in shock, but she was also scared." "Scared of what?" Sylvia hesitated. "That they would find out she was involved, that they would blame her. So she made me promise not to tell anyone. And I promised. Because back then I was also carrying my own secrets. My daughter had just passed away. I was shattered, so I kept her secret, just as she kept mine." Richard stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair. "You knew. All this time you knew this and didn't tell me. You came into my house, cared for my son, gained my trust, and hid this from me." Sylvia didn't flinch. "I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But I didn't come here because of Beatrice. I came because of Leo. When I saw the ad, when I read about a boy who had lost his mother and closed himself off from the world, I saw my Eleanor. I saw a chance to do something I couldn't do for her, to help someone come back. And Beatrice, did she know you were here? No, at least not at first, but she has her ways, and when she found out, she decided to come back, because she wants Leo, not out of love, but out of guilt. She thinks that if she cares for him, she'll redeem herself for what she did to Isabella." Richard walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Leo was playing alone with his paper boats. The boy seemed so fragile, so oblivious to the chaos forming around him. "I won't let her get near him, not after what you told me." Sylvia approached, lightly touching his shoulder. "Richard, you need to understand something. Beatrice isn't evil. She's broken. Just like you. Just like me. Just like Leo. We all carry pieces that no longer fit. And sometimes, pain makes us make wrong decisions." He turned, and his eyes welling up. "So what do I do? Do I let her take my son? Do I let her destroy everything we're building?" "No. You confront it, but not with anger. With truth. Because if you don't give Beatrice a chance to explain herself, she'll use the law. And then everything will turn into a battle no one will win." Richard knew she was right, but accepting it hurt. It hurt because it meant reopening the wound he had tried to heal alone. It hurt because it meant facing the truth about Isabella's last night, and he didn't know if he was ready for that. In the days that followed, the house became a field of silent tension. Beatrice returned twice more, always accompanied by the lawyer, always insisting on her rights. Richard refused to speak with her, delegating everything to his own lawyer, but Leo felt everything. The boy, who had begun to open up, withdrew again. The paper boats stopped appearing, the drawings ceased. He returned to the corner by the window, looking out with that empty gaze Richard so feared. Sylvia did what she could. She sat next to Leo, sang softly, told stories without expecting answers. But the boy seemed to be drifting away again, as if he sensed that something bad was about to happen. It was then that Richard made a decision. He called Beatrice for a conversation, but this time, alone. No lawyers, no witnesses, just the two of them. She accepted and appeared at the house on a weak, sunny afternoon, wearing simple clothes and without her challenging posture from before. She looked tired, defeated. They sat on the veranda. With coffee neither of them touched. Richard began to speak, but Beatrice interrupted him. "I know you found out. Sylvia told you, didn't she?" Richard nodded. "She told me. But I want to hear it from you. I want to know what really happened that night." Beatrice took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the coffee cup. "Isabella and I were different. Always have been. She was the good one, the responsible one, the one who followed the rules. I was the rebel, the one who kept running away. When our parents died, Isabella took over everything. She took care of me, paid for my studies, supported me in every wrong decision I made, and me. I only knew how to demand attention, demand time, demand love." She paused, wiping away a tear that insisted on falling. "That night, I was desperate. I had gotten involved with the wrong people, made choices I couldn't undo. Isabella found out and wanted to help me, but I didn't want help. I wanted her to fix everything, as she always did. So I called her, screamed, cried, made a scene, and she came. She left you, left Leo, and came to pick me up." "And what happened?" Beatrice closed her eyes, as if reliving the scene was too painful. "We got in the car. She tried to talk, to calm me down, but I was out of control. I screamed that she only cared about the perfect family she had built, that she had forgotten about me. Isabella started to cry. She said she always loved me, that she would do anything for me, but that I needed to stop destroying myself. I couldn't bear to hear it. I asked her to stop the car. She stopped, and I got out. I simply got out and left her there alone, crying. And then," Beatrice opened her eyes, now red. "Then I walked a few blocks. I was furious, blind with rage. When I finally calmed down and decided to go back, I heard the sirens. I saw the lights, and I knew. I didn't need to see the car to know it was her. I ran there, but they wouldn't let me pass. And when I finally got into the hospital, it was too late. She was already gone." Richard felt his throat tighten. "And why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because I was scared. Scared they would blame me. Scared they would find out I was involved with dangerous people. Scared of losing everything. So I ran away. I went abroad and tried to start over, but the guilt never left me. Every day, I woke up remembering that I abandoned my sister, that she died alone because of me." Richard remained silent for long minutes. Then he said in a low voice, You didn't kill Isabella. The accident killed her. You just made a mistake. A terrible mistake, but a human one. Beatrice looked at him, surprised. You don't hate me. Richard shook his head. I wanted to hate you, but I can't. Because I also made mistakes. I also left Isabella alone many times. I also failed her. Beatrice sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Richard stood up, hesitated, but then hugged her. It was a silent embrace, laden with shared pain. When they separated, Beatrice wiped her face and asked, "And now, will you let me see Leo?" Richard sighed. "I don't know. Leo is starting to heal, and your presence is bringing back the darkness. I need to think about what's best for him." Beatrice nodded, understanding. "I just wanted a chance to fix things. To be for Leo what I wasn't for Isabella. Perhaps you can, but it will take time and patience, and you need to accept that he might never fully accept you." Beatrice agreed. "I accept. I just want to try." In the following days, Richard talked at length with Sylvia about what to do. She suggested they give Beatrice a chance, but gradually, small visits, always supervised, always respecting Leo's pace. Richard agreed, but made it clear that at the slightest sign of discomfort from his son, everything would be stopped. Beatrice's first official visit was tense. Leo barely looked at her. He clung to Sylvia the whole time, holding her hand tightly. Beatrice tried to talk, but the boy didn't respond. She brought gifts, toys, books, a teddy bear. Leo ignored them. At the end of the afternoon, Beatrice left in silence, visibly shaken, but she returned, and kept returning. Every week. Always at the same time, always bringing something different. Gradually, Leo began to accept her presence, not with enthusiasm, but with a silent tolerance. He still didn't speak to her, but he stopped hiding. It was during one of these visits that something unexpected happened. Beatrice brought an old box full of photos. They were photos of Isabella as a child, when the two were small and played together. Richard had never seen those images. How Isabella rarely spoke about her childhood. He always thought it was because she had lost her parents early, and the memories were too painful. Beatrice showed the photos to Leo, explaining each one with affection. "Here, your mother was 6 years old. She loved climbing trees. Here, she's dressed up for a school party. She wanted to be a ballerina." Leo picked up one of the photos, observing it carefully. It was Isabella, around 8 years old, holding a paper boat. Richard felt his heart race. Beatrice also noticed. "Your mother loved making little boats. She said they carried her dreams far away, to places where everything was possible." Leo looked at Beatrice for the first time since she had arrived. Slowly, with an almost inaudible voice, he asked, "Do you know the place of the little boats?" Beatrice smiled, tears in her eyes. "I do. Your mother took me there once. It's a special place. Where the river meets the lake. She said it was the place where dreams came true." Leo looked at Richard, who nodded. Beatrice continued, "If you want, I can take you there. We can release little boats together, just like I used to do with your mother." Leo didn't answer, but he picked up another paper boat he had made days before and placed it in Beatrice's hand. It was a small gesture, but significant. It was the beginning of a bridge. Richard watched everything with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Part of him rejoiced at seeing Leo opening up. Another part feared that Beatrice, deep down, still harbored hidden intentions. But Sylvia calmed him that night, saying that not everything needed to be perfect to be true. Meanwhile, the house's routine began to stabilize. Leo started talking more, playing, asking to go out. Richard returned to work with more lightness, knowing that Sylvia was there, taking care of everything. And Beatrice, little by little, became a less strange and more familiar presence, but peace, as always, was fragile. One afternoon, Richard received a phone call from an unknown number. It was a man, with a deep voice and a threatening tone. He simply said, "Do you know who Beatrice was involved with? Do you know what she did? If you want to protect your son, you'd better find out soon." Richard tried to answer, but the call ended. He stood there, phone still in hand, his heart racing. Who was that man? What did he mean? And more importantly, was Beatrice still in danger? That night, Richard confronted Beatrice again. She hesitated, but then confessed. She said that before leaving the country, she had gotten involved with people linked to illicit financial schemes. Nothing violent, but enough to leave traces. She thought she had left everything behind. But apparently, someone had discovered her whereabouts. Richard was furious. "You brought this into my house, near my son," Beatrice cried, asking for forgiveness. She said she didn't know she was still being sought, that she thought everything had been resolved. But now, with the concrete threat, she didn't know what to do. Richard made a quick decision. He hired private security for the house, reinforced the gates, installed additional cameras, and asked Beatrice to temporarily distance herself until the situation was clarified. She accepted, but before leaving, she left Leo a gift, a paper boat with a message written, "I'll be back, I promise." Leo carefully kept the boat, and that night, when Richard went to say goodnight, the boy looked at him and said, "Aunt Beatrice is scared, just like me when Mommy left." Richard felt a lump in his throat. He hugged his son tightly and promised he would do everything to protect him. But deep down, he knew that the real threat didn't just come from outside. It also came from the wounds of the past, which insisted on bleeding. The weeks that followed were marked by constant vigilance. Richard could barely sleep, always alert to any noise, any unusual movement. Private security made periodic rounds, but this did not completely alleviate the tension that gripped the house. Leo sensed the heavy atmosphere. He became quieter again, more observant. Sylvia tried to maintain the routine, but she also felt the weight of the situation. Beatrice called every day, always asking about Leo, always saying she was trying to resolve the problems she had left behind. Richard was polite, but distant. He couldn't allow her to return until he was sure she posed no danger. And with each passing day without concrete answers, his distrust grew. It was on one of those tense nights that Sylvia found Richard sitting alone on the veranda, looking at the dark sky. She approached silently and sat beside him. "You can't live like this, Richard. You can't carry everything alone." He didn't answer immediately. He just kept looking up as if seeking answers in the stars. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "I don't know who to trust anymore. Beatrice brought problems, and you hid secrets. How do I know there's nothing else you two are concealing?" Sylvia took a deep breath. She knew this conversation would come sooner or later. "You're right to doubt. I lied about my past, and Beatrice brought her own shadows. But there's a difference between keeping secrets out of fear and keeping secrets out of malice. We both made wrong choices, but never with the intention of hurting Leo. Or you." Richard finally faced her. "And what if these wrong choices put my son in danger? How will I forgive myself?" Sylvia lightly touched his hand. "You won't. Just as I never forgave myself for not being able to save Eleanor. Just as Beatrice never forgave herself for abandoning Isabella. Guilt doesn't disappear, Richard. We just learn to live with it." Richard felt his eyes sting. He held Sylvia's hand, squeezing tightly. "I don't want to lose Leo. He's all I have left. You won't lose him, because I'm here, and I'll continue to be here as long as you allow it." The two remained like that for long minutes, in silence, holding hands as if that were enough to keep the chaos at bay. But fate, as always, had other plans. The next morning, Richard received an unexpected visit. It was a man in a dark suit, who introduced himself as a private investigator hired by Beatrice. He brought documents, proof that Beatrice had settled all debts and severed any ties with the people involved in the financial schemes. More than that, he brought the information about who had made the threatening call, a former partner who was trying to extort her, but who was now being prosecuted. Richard felt immense relief, but at the same time a new doubt arose. If Beatrice had resolved everything, why hadn't she contacted him sooner? Why had she waited so long? The investigator explained that Beatrice didn't want to return to Richard and Leo's lives merely as a problematic relative. She wanted to resolve everything first, so she could come back with clean hands, and that's exactly what she did. Richard thanked him for the information and, as soon as the investigator left, called Beatrice. The conversation was brief, but sincere. He apologized for having pushed her away so abruptly. Beatrice, in turn, said she understood, that she would wait as long as necessary. But Richard didn't want to wait anymore. He invited Beatrice to return, and this time, without restrictions. Beatrice arrived the next day, visibly moved. Leo greeted her with a small smile and, for the first time, spontaneously held her hand. Beatrice cried, but it was a cry of relief. In the days that followed, the relationship between Beatrice and Leo strengthened. She started visiting more frequently, always bringing stories about Isabella, always helping Leo build memories of a mother he barely remembered. And little by little, the boy began to talk more about his feelings, his doubts, his fears. It was during one of these conversations that Leo asked a question that caught everyone by surprise. "Aunt Beatrice, why did my mommy leave?" Beatrice looked at Richard, who nodded, giving her permission to answer. She knelt beside Leo and said, in a soft voice, "Your mommy didn't want to leave, Leo. She had an accident. But before she left, she loved you more than anything in the world. And that love is still here, inside you." Leo thought for a moment. "And is she happy now?" Beatrice smiled, tears in her eyes. "Yes, she is at peace, and she will always be watching over you, even from afar." Leo nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. Then he went back to playing with his little boats. As if that conversation had lifted a weight he had carried for years. Richard watched everything with a heavy heart. Sylvia, by his side, was also emotional. It was as if, finally, the house was truly beginning to heal, but not everything was resolved. One afternoon, while Sylvia was organizing some things in Isabella's office, she found a hidden folder at the back of a drawer. Inside it were documents, letters, and notes. Sylvia began to read, not quite understanding what she was seeing, but gradually the pieces fit together. And what she discovered left her paralyzed. Isabella had discovered, months before her passing, that Beatrice was involved in something serious. More than debts or financial schemes. There was a letter in which Isabella vented, saying she didn't know how to help her sister, that she was afraid Beatrice's choices would destroy the entire family, and even more disturbing, there was a note saying that Isabella planned to confront someone who, according to her, was truly responsible for everything. Sylvia felt a chill down her spine. This changed everything. If Isabella had planned to confront someone that night, then perhaps the accident hadn't just been an accident. Perhaps there was something more, something no one ever discovered. She rushed to the living room where Richard was talking to Beatrice. She interrupted abruptly. "Richard, I need to talk to you now." Richard noticed the urgency in her tone and stood up. Beatrice also noticed and tensed. "What happened?" Sylvia showed them the documents, explaining what she had found. Richard read everything in silence, his face growing paler and paler. When he finished, he looked at Beatrice with an expression that mixed shock and doubt. "You knew about this?" Beatrice shook her head, visibly shaken. "No. Isabella never told me she had discovered so much. She just said she wanted to talk, that we needed to resolve things. But I didn't know she had investigated so deeply." Richard sat down, running his hands through his hair. So who was this person Isabella was going to confront? Beatrice remained silent for long seconds. Then, with a trembling voice, she answered, "I think I know, but I'm not sure. And if I'm right, it will change everything." Richard demanded that she speak. Beatrice took a deep breath and told him. She said that, at the time, she had gotten involved with a man named Mark Thompson. He was a businessman, seemingly successful, but in reality, he was involved in money laundering schemes. Beatrice didn't know this at first. When she found out, she was already deeply involved. She tried to get out, but Mark threatened her. He said that if she reported him or tried to escape, he would destroy her life and the lives of everyone around her. That's why I asked Isabella for help. She was the only person I trusted, but I never imagined she would investigate on her own. I never imagined she would go so far. Richard felt anger rise. "And this Mark? Where is he now?" Beatrice averted her gaze. "I don't know. After I fled the country, I lost contact with everyone. But if Isabella was planning to confront him, then maybe he had something to do with the accident." Richard stood up, determined. "I'll find out. I'll follow every detail, every clue. And if this man had anything to do with Isabella's death, he will pay." Sylvia touched his arm, trying to calm him. "Richard, think about Leo. Think about what's best for him. Stirring this up now could bring more pain, more danger." Richard looked at her, his eyes shining with determination. "I can't let this go. Isabella deserves justice, and Leo deserves to know the truth." Beatrice also stood up. "I'll help you. I'll do whatever it takes to find Mark, and if he really had something to do with what happened, I'll make sure he faces the consequences." The three stood there, united by a common purpose, but Richard knew that journey would be dangerous, and that not everyone would emerge unscathed. In the days that followed, Richard hired a professional investigator. He provided all the information he had, all the documents Sylvia had found. The investigator promised results in a few weeks. Meanwhile, life in the house tried to proceed as normally as possible. Leo continued to progress, becoming more communicative and connected. Beatrice became a constant presence, always bringing lightness and affection. And Sylvia continued to be the pillar that sustained everything. But the wait was agonizing. Richard could barely concentrate on work. He spent hours looking at the phone, waiting for news. And when the news finally arrived, it was devastating. The investigator discovered that Mark Thompson had left the country shortly after Isabella's passing. He had gone abroad, changed his identity, and never returned. But the most disturbing thing was that, according to witnesses who were located, Mark had met with Isabella on the night of the accident, and the conversation had been tense. Richard felt the world collapse. That confirmed his worst suspicions. Isabella had not suffered a common accident. She had been forced into a dangerous situation, and Mark was responsible, but there was no way to prove it. Without concrete evidence, without witnesses willing to speak officially, everything remained in the realm of speculation. The investigator recommended that Richard leave the case in the hands of the authorities, but he knew that, after so many years, justice would be unlikely. That night, Richard locked himself in his room and cried as he hadn't cried since the day he lost Isabella. Sylvia knocked on the door, but he didn't open it. He just stayed there, alone with his pain, his anger, his helplessness. It was Leo who finally brought him back. The boy pushed the door, which wasn't really locked, and entered. He climbed onto the bed and lay down beside his father without saying anything. He just stayed there, offering his silent presence. Richard hugged his son tightly, and in that moment, he understood that true justice would not come from punishments or revenge. It would come from living well, from caring for Leo, from honoring Isabella's memory by building a life full of love and peace. In the following days, Richard made a decision. He put away all the documents, all the evidence, but he would no longer pursue Mark. He would no longer live in the past. He would focus on the present, on the future, on Leo. And that's exactly what he did. With Sylvia's help, Beatrice's help, and with the strength he found within himself, Richard began to rebuild his life, and Leo's life. And, little by little, the house that was once marked by silence and pain transformed into a home full of laughter, stories, hope. The following months brought profound transformation. Richard smiled again, planned for the future, dreamed. Leo was unrecognizable. The boy who once spent hours motionless at the window now ran through the garden, asked about everything, drew non-stop. Sylvia remained there, no longer just as a caregiver, but as an essential part of that family that was rebuilding itself. And Beatrice, who arrived carrying guilt and secrets, was now a constant presence, bringing memories of Isabella that made Leo smile. But there was something that still needed to be resolved. A promise Beatrice had made that remained in Leo's mind, the place of the little boats, the place where Isabella used to go as a child, where she released her dreams in paper boats, hoping they would come true. Leo talked about it almost every day. He asked to go, he asked what it was like. He wanted to feel the same connection his mother felt. Richard hesitated, not because he didn't want to take his son, but because it represented a closure, a definitive goodbye. And he didn't know if he was ready. But Sylvia, with her silent wisdom, advised him, "Sometimes, we need to return to the places that marked the past to be able to move forward. Leo needs this. And you do too." Richard agreed. He scheduled a weekend, invited Beatrice and Sylvia, and the four set off for the countryside of Suffolk, where the place was located. Beatrice guided the way, recalling every detail of the trips she used to take with Isabella when they were children. The journey took a few hours, but the landscape kept changing, becoming greener, more peaceful. Leo looked out the window, fascinated, asking questions about everything. When they finally arrived, it was almost noon. The place was exactly as Beatrice had described, a small river that flowed into a lake surrounded by leafy trees. The water was clear, reflecting the blue sky. There was peace in that place, a peace that seemed to heal just by existing. Leo jumped out of the car, running, holding the bag of paper boats he had prepared in the previous days. Beatrice followed him, smiling. Richard and Sylvia walked more slowly, side by side, without haste. When they reached the riverbank, Leo was already crouching, touching the water with his hands, feeling the temperature, observing the movement. Beatrice knelt beside him. "Your mother loved this place. She used to say that here, dreams had the power to come true, because the water takes away what holds us back and brings back what truly matters." Leo looked at her, his eyes shining. "Is my mommy here?" Beatrice smiled, tears in her eyes. "In a way, yes. She is in every place that was important to her, and now she is in you too." Leo nodded, seeming to understand something too profound for his age. Then he took the first boat from the bag. It was the largest, the most elaborate. On it, written in shaky letters, was, "For Mommy." He held the boat for a moment, as if deciding whether he really wanted to release it. Then, slowly, he placed it in the water and gently pushed it. The boat began to glide, carried by the calm current. Richard watched from afar, his heart heavy. Sylvia held his hand, giving him strength. Beatrice was also emotional, but she smiled. Everyone there knew that this moment was more than an outing. It was a ritual of farewell, of acceptance, of healing. Leo released more boats, on each one a different message, for Daddy, for Aunt Beatrice, for Sylvia, and finally, a boat without a message, just empty. He looked at Richard and said, "This one is for new dreams, the ones that are yet to come." Richard couldn't hold back his tears. He knelt beside his son and hugged him tightly. "I love you, Leo, more than anything in this world." Leo returned the hug. "I love you too, Dad." Beatrice and Sylvia approached, forming a circle around the two. For a moment, those four human beings, each carrying their pains and their stories, were united by something greater. By love, by loss, by hope. After some time there, sitting on the riverbank, talking, laughing, reminiscing, Richard mustered the courage to do something he had been postponing for months. He looked at Sylvia and said, his voice firm but emotional, "Sylvia, I need to tell you something. You came into my life and Leo's life when everything seemed lost. You brought us back, and I can no longer imagine my life without you." Sylvia looked at him, surprised. Richard continued, "I know it started as a job, but it turned into something much bigger, at least for me. And I wanted to know if, perhaps, you feel the same." Sylvia remained silent for long seconds. Then she replied, in a soft voice, "Richard, I came into this house because I saw in Leo the daughter I lost, but I stayed because I found in you both a family I thought I would never have again. Yes, I feel the same, and I'm scared of it. Scared that it won't be enough, scared that I won't be able to fill the space Isabella left." Richard shook his head. "You don't need to fill her space. You just need to be yourself, because it's you that Leo needs, and it's you that I want by my side." Sylvia smiled, tears streaming down her face. "Then yes, I want to stay. I want to be part of this family, truly." Beatrice, who had been listening in silence, also cried. She approached and hugged the two. "Isabella would be happy. She wouldn't want you to be stuck in the past. She would want you to be happy." Leo, who had been observing everything carefully, asked, "Is Sylvia going to live with us forever?" Richard smiled. "If she wants to, yes." Leo cheered, jumping for joy. "Now we have a real family." Everyone laughed, relieved. The tension that had marked the past few months finally dissipated, and in its place remained the promise of a new beginning. As the sun began to set, the four returned to the car, but before leaving, Richard made sure to go back to the riverbank. He took a small boat he had secretly prepared from his pocket. On it, only, "Thank you, Isabella, for everything, for Leo, for teaching me to love. I will take care of him. I promise," was written. He placed the boat in the water and watched it drift away, carried by the current, until it disappeared around the bend of the river. Then he returned to the car, where his new family awaited him. The drive back was peaceful. Leo slept in the back seat, exhausted but happy. Sylvia and Beatrice talked softly about future plans. Richard drove in silence, but with a smile on his face. For the first time in years, he felt he was on the right path. When they arrived home, it was already night. Richard carried Leo to his room, put the boy in bed, and covered him carefully. Before leaving, he kissed his son's forehead and whispered, "Good night, my love. Tomorrow will be a new day, full of new dreams." Leo smiled, still sleeping, as if he had heard. In the living room, Sylvia and Beatrice were preparing tea. Richard joined them, sitting at the table. The three stayed there, talking about the day, about the future, about the plans they had. Beatrice mentioned that she was thinking of moving back to Cambridge for good, to be closer to Leo. Richard and Sylvia supported the idea. After all, she was family. When Beatrice left, it was already late. Richard and Sylvia were alone. He pulled her to the sofa, and the two sat embraced in silence. They didn't need words, just each other's presence. After some time, Sylvia broke the silence. "Richard, I have a confession to make." He looked at her, curious. "Go ahead." Sylvia took a deep breath. "When I came into this house, I wasn't just running from my pain. I was looking for a reason to go on. After losing Eleanor, I lost the meaning of everything. And in Leo, I found not just a child to care for, but a reason to live again." Richard hugged her tighter. "And I found in you the strength I didn't know I still had. Thank you for not giving up on us." Sylvia smiled. "I'll never give up." The two stayed like that for a while longer, until exhaustion won. They went up to their rooms, each in their own. But for the first time, there was no longer that feeling of emptiness. The house was full, full of love, full of hope, full of life. In the months that followed, the routine established itself naturally. Sylvia officially assumed the role of Richard's partner, not just a caregiver. Beatrice moved back to Cambridge and rented an apartment nearby, visiting Leo almost every day. The child continued to evolve, becoming more communicative, happier. He returned to school, made friends, participated in activities. It was as if he had been reborn. Richard also changed. He returned to investing in work with passion, but without forgetting his family. He began to value the small moments, the dinners together, the walks in the park, the conversations before bed. And by Sylvia's side, he discovered that it was possible to love again. Not as he loved Isabella, but in a different, equally true way. Beatrice, in turn, found her redemption in being an aunt, in being present, in telling stories of Isabella to Leo, keeping her sister's memory alive. And little by little, she also began to forgive herself, to understand that the past could not be changed, but the future was still open. One day, almost a year after that trip to the place of the little boats, Leo came home from school with a drawing. It was a family, Daddy, Sylvia, Aunt Beatrice, and him, all together, smiling, holding paper boats. At the top of the drawing, written in now firm letters, was "Grease my family." And up in the clouds, a female figure with long hair watched everything with a smile. Richard looked at the drawing and felt his heart overflow. He showed it to Sylvia, who was also moved. Beatrice, who was visiting, saw the drawing and cried with joy. Leo looked at the three of them and said, with the naturalness of children, "Mommy is happy, I know it, because her little boats arrived where they were supposed to go." Richard hugged his son, unable to speak. Sylvia and Beatrice also approached, forming that circle of love again that had formed on the riverbank. And there, in that house that was once marked by silence and pain, now resonated the most beautiful sound of all, the sound of life happening, the sound of a family that, despite all losses, All mistakes, all pains, managed to find its way back. Back to love, back to hope, back to dreams. And as the sun set outside, illuminating the living room with a golden light, Richard looked around and finally understood what Isabella meant in that old letter. Follow the gentle signs. They will guide you. The signs had always been there. In the paper boats, in the silent gestures, in the improbable connections, in the people who arrived when everything seemed lost, and he followed them, one by one, until he found what mattered most, until he found love, until he found peace, until he found, finally, his way back home. Life in Cambridge had found its own rhythm, a cadence that mixed routine and daily discoveries. Richard woke early, prepared coffee while Sylvia got Leo ready for school. Beatrice appeared some mornings to have coffee with them before going to work. She had found a job at an NGO that cared for vulnerable children, finding there a purpose that filled the void left by years of flight and guilt. The house, which was once a mausoleum of silences, now vibrated with conversations, laughter, and even small daily discussions about trivial things like what to eat for dinner or what movie to watch on the weekend. But peace, as Richard had painfully learned, was never permanent. There was always something new emerging on the horizon, testing the structure they had built with such care. And this time, the challenge came from where he least expected it, from Sylvia herself. On a Thursday afternoon, while preparing Leo's snack, Sylvia received a call. Richard noticed she became tense, responding in monosyllables, looking out the window as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. When she hung up, her eyes were red, but she tried to hide it, returning to the kitchen with a forced smile. Richard followed her there, leaning against the doorframe. Who was that? Sylvia continued stirring the pot, not looking at him. No one important, just an old acquaintance. Richard crossed his arms. Sylvia, we promised no more secrets, so tell me, what's going on? She finally stopped, resting her hands on the sink. She took a deep breath before turning around. It was from the town where I used to live, where I lost Eleanor. They want me to go back. There's a legal matter that needs to be resolved. Something related to the inheritance, to the house that was left behind. Richard felt his stomach tighten. You'll have to go. Sylvia nodded. Yes, and it might take a few days, maybe a week. A week. To Richard, it seemed like an eternity. Since Sylvia had entered their lives, she had never been absent for more than a few hours. The idea of being without her, of seeing Leo without her, brought a discomfort he couldn't name, but he knew it was pure selfishness. So he swallowed his fear and said, It's all right, we'll be fine. You need to sort this out, and when you come back, we'll be here waiting for you. Sylvia approached and hugged him. Thank you. I know it's not easy for you, but I promise I'll be back. This is my home now. You are my family. Richard returned the hug, closing his eyes. I know. Go and sort everything out. We'll be fine here. But when Sylvia told Leo the news, his reaction was different. The boy remained silent for long minutes, processing the information. Then he asked in a small voice, You'll come back, won't you? Sylvia knelt before him, holding his hands. Yes, my love. It's just a quick trip. And when I come back, I'll bring you a surprise. Leo didn't seem convinced, but Mommy also left and didn't come back. Sylvia's heart broke. She pulled the boy into a tight hug. I'm not your Mommy, Leo, and I'll never try to be. But I love you as if you were, and those who love always come back, always. Leo cried softly, clinging to her. Sylvia also cried, feeling the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. It wasn't just caring for a child. It was being a safe harbor, being certainty, being a constant presence. And now, for the first time, she would have to break that constancy. Richard watched the scene from afar, his heart heavy. He knew he would need to be strong for both of them. When Sylvia finally let go of Leo, he approached and said, Son, Sylvia needs to go, but while she's away, I'll be here, and Aunt Beatrice too. We'll take care of you. And before you know it, she'll be back. Leo wiped his tears and nodded, trying to be brave. Okay, but call her every day. Okay, Dad? Richard smiled. Every day, I promise. Sylvia left on Saturday morning, on a very early flight. Richard drove her to the airport, both silent throughout the journey. When they arrived, she hesitated before getting out of the car. Richard held her hand. "It's going to be okay. Resolve what you need to and come back soon." Sylvia nodded, but there was something in her eyes that Richard couldn't decipher. Was it fear? Uncertainty? He couldn't tell. He just kissed her forehead and watched her enter the terminal, carrying a small suitcase and an invisible weight on her shoulders. The first week without Sylvia was harder than Richard imagined. Leo woke up asking for her. At night, before bed, he wanted to video call her. Sylvia always answered. But Richard noticed she seemed tired, worried. She said everything was fine, that she would be back soon, but there was something in her voice that wasn't convincing. Beatrice helped a lot during this period. She started sleeping at the house some nights, taking care of Leo when Richard needed to work. The two formed an improvised duo, trying to keep the routine as normal as possible. But Sylvia's absence was felt in every corner. In the kitchen, where she always left affectionate notes. In the living room, where she used to sit with Leo to draw. In the garden, where she watered the plants every morning. It was during one of those nights, when Beatrice was putting Leo to sleep, that she found a drawing hidden under the boy's pillow. It was Sylvia, with a suitcase in her hand, walking away, and in the background, a small figure, clearly Leo, crying. Beatrice felt a pang in her chest. She showed the drawing to Richard when she came downstairs. "He's scared she won't come back," Beatrice said with concern. "And honestly, Richard, I am too." Richard frowned. "Why do you say that?" Beatrice hesitated. "Because I know that look. It's the same one I had when I ran away, when I left everything behind. Sylvia is struggling with something there. Something that might be bigger than the love she feels for you." Richard shook his head. "No, she'll come back." She promised. But doubt was already planted, and it grew every day that passed without more concrete news. Sylvia did call, yes, but the conversations were increasingly shorter, more evasive. She said everything was fine, but Richard knew it was a lie. On the 10th day, she finally told the truth. She called late at night, when Leo was already asleep. Her voice was choked. "Richard, I need to tell you something. And you're not going to like it." He felt his heart race. "What is it?" Sylvia took a deep breath. "The legal matter I came to resolve isn't just about the house. It's about Eleanor, about how she passed away. There's an investigation that has been reopened, and they're asking me questions, difficult questions." Richard remained silent, processing. "You're being investigated." "Not exactly, but there are insinuations. There are people who think I had some responsibility for what happened, and until that's clarified, I can't leave here." "How long will it take?" she cried on the other end of the line. "I don't know. It could be weeks. It could be months. I don't know, Richard." He felt the world collapse again. "And what do I tell Leo?" Sylvia sobbed. "Tell him I love you, that I love you both. But sometimes things don't happen the way we want them to, and that I'll do everything possible to come back soon." Richard hung up the phone with trembling hands. He sat on the sofa, head in his hands, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Beatrice, who had heard everything, approached. "What do we do now?" Richard looked at her, his eyes red. "We carry on, for Leo. We can't fall apart. Not again." Beatrice nodded. "I'll stay here, for as many days as needed. We'll get through this together." And that's exactly what they did. Richard and Beatrice took turns caring for Leo, trying to maintain normalcy, but the boy felt it. He asked for Sylvia every day, and with each passing day, without concrete answers, he began to close himself off again. The drawing stopped. The paper boats were forgotten. He returned to the corner by the window, that same corner where he spent hours when everything began. Richard was desperate. Watching his son regress was too painful. He talked to psychologists, asked for advice, but everyone said the same thing. Leo needed time. And Sylvia. It was then that Richard made a decision. He picked up Leo and went to the town where Sylvia was. He didn't warn her. He simply packed his bags, put his son in the car, and drove for hours until he got there. Beatrice stayed in Cambridge, taking care of the house and praying that everything would work out. When they arrived, it was already night. Richard knew where Sylvia was staying. She had mentioned the hotel name in one of the calls. He knocked on the room door, his heart racing. When Sylvia opened it and saw the two of them there, standing in the corridor, she collapsed. Leo ran into her arms, crying. Sylvia hugged him tightly, repeating countless times, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Richard entered the room, closed the door behind him, and waited. When Sylvia finally let go of Leo, who had fallen asleep on the sofa exhausted from the trip, she turned to Richard. "You shouldn't have come." He crossed his arms. "Yes, I should have. Because you're part of our family, and we don't abandon family." Sylvia wiped her tears. "Richard, you don't understand. There are people here who think I was to blame for Eleanor's death, that I didn't take proper care of her, that I was negligent. If that comes to light, if it's proven, I could be held responsible. And that will stain not only my reputation, but yours too." Richard approached. "I don't care about reputation. I care about you, about what you represent to Leo and to me. So we're going to sort this out, together, the way we always have." Sylvia shook her head. "It's not that simple. There are witnesses. There are documents. There's evidence that can be misinterpreted. Then we'll present the truth. We'll hire the best lawyers. We'll fight. Because that's what families do, they fight." Sylvia looked at him, her eyes shining. "Why are you doing this? Why are you risking so much?" Richard held her face with both hands. "Because I love you, and Leo loves you. And without you, we're not a complete family. It's that simple," Sylvia cried. But this time, it was a cry of relief. She hugged Richard tightly, finally allowing herself to believe that she wasn't alone. In the days that followed, Richard stayed in the town, helping Sylvia organize her defense. He hired a competent lawyer who analyzed all the documents and concluded that there was no basis for any accusation. What existed were old grievances, people who blamed Sylvia for something that was completely beyond her control. Eleanor had passed away due to unexpected medical complications. Sylvia did everything she could. But the pain of those close to her needed a culprit, and she was the easiest target. With the proper evidence and testimonies from doctors who cared for Eleanor, the investigation was closed. Sylvia was acquitted of any responsibility, but the process left its marks. She was exhausted, emotionally drained. Richard cared for her as she had cared for Leo, with patience, with affection, with constant presence, and little by little, Sylvia recovered. Leo also helped, always staying close, holding her hand, drawing for her. When they finally returned to Cambridge, 2 weeks later, Beatrice welcomed them with a special dinner. The house was decorated with Leo's drawings, with fresh flowers, with lit candles. It was a celebration of the family that had remained united even in the face of the storm. That night, after Leo had fallen asleep, the three adults sat on the veranda. Richard raised a glass of wine and said, "To us, to everything we've been through, and to everything we'll still go through together." Sylvia and Beatrice raised their glasses, "To us." And there, under the starry sky of Cambridge, that improvised family, built on pain and love in equal measure, celebrated the victory of being together, of choosing to stay, of fighting when it would have been easier to give up. But life, as always, held more surprises, and the next one would come in a way none of them expected. The following months brought a stability Richard almost couldn't believe possible. The routine had consolidated naturally, each person finding their place in that very particular family dynamic. Sylvia returned to being the constant, welcoming presence she always was, but now with a different lightness, as if the weight of the closed investigation had released something within her. Beatrice continued to appear regularly, always bringing new stories about the children at the NGO where she worked, filling the house with a refreshing energy. And Leo, little Leo, who was once a child locked in his own silence, now talked non-stop, asked about everything, laughed loudly. Richard watched it all with gratitude, but also with fear, a silent fear that, at any moment, something could destroy the peace built with such effort. He had learned the most painful way that happiness was fragile, that it only took a phone call, an accident, a revelation for everything to collapse. And that's exactly what happened on a Tuesday morning. Richard was in his office when he received a call from an unknown number. He answered without much thought, expecting it to be a client or supplier, but the voice on the other end paralyzed him. "Hello, Richard. It's been a while." It was a deep male voice he didn't immediately recognize. "Who is this? You don't remember me. It's Mark. Mark Thompson." Richard's blood ran cold. Mark. The man Beatrice had mentioned. The man involved with Isabella on the night of the accident. The man Richard swore never to think about again, but who lived like a shadow in the back of his mind. "What do you want?" Richard's voice came out firm, but his hands trembled. Mark laughed on the other end of the line. "Calm down. I'm not calling to cause problems. In fact, I'm calling to resolve some. I know Beatrice is there, I know she's back, and I know you must be wondering what really happened that night." Richard gripped the phone tightly. "I don't want to talk to you, and if you come near my family, I'll go to the authorities." Mark sighed. "Richard, I understand your anger, but you don't know everything, and I think you deserve to know. Isabella wasn't who you thought, and that night didn't happen the way they told you." Richard felt the world spin. "What are you talking about?" Mark paused dramatically. "I'm in Cambridge. Let's meet, just the two of us. I'll tell you everything, and then you decide what to do with that information." Richard wanted to refuse. He wanted to hang up the phone and pretend that call never happened, but curiosity, mixed with an old need to understand, spoke louder. "Where?" "There's a coffee shop downtown. The Muses Cafe. Tomorrow noon. I'll be there." And the call ended. Richard stood there for long minutes, phone still in hand, his heart pounding. Part of him knew this was a mistake. That meeting Mark could open wounds that had barely healed, but another part, the part that had never been able to make peace with Isabella's death, needed to know. That night, Richard told neither Sylvia nor Beatrice anything. He just said he had an important meeting the next day and would be back late. Sylvia noticed he was different, more tense, but didn't press. She just kissed his forehead and said she would be there when he returned. The next morning, Richard dressed as if for battle. Dark suit and tie, impeccable shoes. He wanted to be in control, even knowing he probably wouldn't be. He left home early, drove downtown, and arrived at the coffee shop half an hour before the agreed time. He ordered a coffee he couldn't drink and waited, his eyes fixed on the door. Mark arrived promptly at noon. He was an ordinary-looking man, around 40, already grey-haired, casual but good-quality clothes. Nothing about him indicated he was the villain Richard had built in his mind. He sat down without asking permission, ordered a coffee from the waiter, and then looked directly at Richard. "Thanks for coming." Richard didn't return the cordiality. "You have 5 minutes. After that, I'm leaving." Mark nodded. "I'll get straight to the point then. Isabella wasn't helping me because of Beatrice. She was investigating me because of you." Richard frowned. "What are you talking about?" Mark took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and placed it on the table. "Isabella discovered I was involved in schemes that could harm your company. Your construction company, Richard. She was trying to stop me before I used information I had about you to blackmail or worse." Richard picked up the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. Inside were copies of documents, emails, notes, all dated 4 years ago. And indeed, there were references to his company, to contracts, to numbers he recognized. "How did you get this?" Mark shrugged. "I had contacts. People infiltrated in various companies. Yours was one of them. Isabella found out by chance, when she was helping Beatrice, and she decided to confront me alone without telling you, because she didn't want you to get involved in something dirty. She thought she could resolve it without dragging you into the middle." Richard felt his throat tighten. "And the accident?" Mark averted his gaze for the first time. "The accident was real." Isabella was nervous, agitated after our conversation. "I said things I shouldn't have. I threatened your family, I threatened you, and she left there distraught. I didn't cause the accident, Richard, but I created the conditions for it to happen." Richard felt anger rise like lava. "You destroyed my life. You destroyed my son. For money." Mark finally looked at him, and there was something akin to remorse in his eyes. "I know, and I've lived with it all these years. That's why I'm here, to give you back this information, To give you the chance to do what Isabella couldn't. Report me. Sue me. Get justice. Richard looked at the documents, then at Mark. Why now? Why after so long? Because I also lost someone, my daughter, 6 months ago, and I realized that money is worth nothing when you lose what truly matters. Isabella tried to warn me about that, but I didn't listen. Now it's too late for me, but maybe not for you. Richard felt a confusion of emotions, anger, pain, compassion, repulsion, all at once. He stood up, picked up the envelope, and looked at Mark one last time. I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but you're right about one thing. It's too late. For you, for me, for all of us. And he left the coffee shop without looking back. The drive back home was hazy. Richard drove on autopilot, his mind processing everything he had just discovered. Isabella had died trying to protect him. She had carried that burden alone, without sharing it with him, because she thought she was sparing him. But in the end, it only created more pain. When he arrived home, Sylvia and Leo were in the garden. The boy was playing with a new toy car Beatrice had given him. Sylvia was watering the plants. The scene was so tranquil, so perfect, that Richard almost collapsed right there. Sylvia noticed his expression and dropped the hose. What happened? Richard shook his head. Later, we'll talk later. But she wouldn't accept it. She picked up Leo, asked him to go inside for a bath, and then turned to Richard. Now, we talk now. And Richard told her. He told her about the call, about the meeting, about what Mark had revealed. Sylvia listened in silence, without interrupting. When he finished, she simply hugged him. Isabella loved you, Richard. And she did what she thought was right. You can't blame yourself for that. But I should have noticed. I should have seen that she was carrying something. Sylvia held his face. We can't see everything. No matter how much we love someone, there are things that remain hidden. You did the best you could with what you knew, just as she did. Richard nodded, but the guilt remained, heavy. That night, he called Beatrice for a serious conversation. He told her about Mark, about what he had discovered. Beatrice turned pale. I didn't know any of this. Isabella never told me. Richard believed her, because he realized that everyone had carried their secrets, their pains, their attempts to protect others, and in the end everyone had been hurt. In the following days, Richard thought a lot about what to do with the information Mark had given him. He spoke with lawyers, analyzed the documents, weighed the options, and finally, he decided he wasn't going to prosecute. He wasn't going to seek revenge. He was going to use that information to protect himself if Mark ever returned. But he wasn't going to let the past continue to poison the present. When he told Sylvia his decision, she supported him. When he told Beatrice, she cried with relief. And when Leo asked why Dad had been so serious lately, Richard simply said, because sometimes we have to make difficult decisions, but always thinking about what's best for the people we love. Leo nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting his father as he always had. Life returned to its rhythm. But there was a subtle change in the air. Richard was more present, more attentive. Sylvia was lighter, as if she had finally left all the ghosts behind. Beatrice visited even more frequently, always bringing news and joy. And Leo continued to grow, develop, building happy memories that would one day replace the shadows of the past. One afternoon, while playing in the garden, Leo asked, Dad, was Mommy brave? Richard smiled, tears in his eyes. Very. The bravest I've ever known. Leo thought for a moment. I want to be brave too, like her and like you. Richard hugged his son tightly. You already are, my love. You already are. And in that moment, Richard understood that true courage was not in seeking justice or revenge. It was in choosing to live, in choosing to love, in choosing to build something new on the rubble of what was lost. Isabella had been brave in trying to protect him. He would be brave in honoring her memory by living fully. Night fell softly over Cambridge. The house, illuminated from within, seemed like a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. And inside it, an improvised but no less true family prepared for another dinner together, with stories to tell, plans to make, dreams to dream. Because in the end, that's what mattered. Not the past that couldn't be changed, but the future that was yet to be written, and they, together, would write each page with love, with truth, with the courage of those who survived the storm and chose to keep sailing. Autumn arrived in Cambridge, bringing with it a subtle change in the air. The trees in the garden began to shed their leaves, painting the ground with shades of gold and brown. There was something poetic in that transformation, as if nature were teaching that letting go was a necessary part of life's cycle. Richard watched from his office window, thinking about how that season perfectly reflected the moment he was living. It was time to leave some things behind. It was time to allow the new to flourish. It had been 3 months since the encounter with Mark. 3 months since Richard decided not to let the past continue dictating his present. And in that period, a lot had changed. Not dramatically or abruptly, but in small daily gestures that, combined, transformed everything. Sylvia had officially become part of the family, not on paper yet, but in everyone's hearts. She and Richard talked more and more about the future, about the possibility of making that union formal, but there was no rush. What mattered was that they knew, for sure, that they wanted to be together. And Leo, who watched everything with his curious child's eyes, already called Sylvia Mom on some occasions, always followed by an apology, as if he were betraying Isabella's memory. But Sylvia, with her gentle wisdom, always said, "You can have 2 mothers, my love, one who gave you life, and another who is here to live it with you." Beatrice had also found her place. She continued working at the NGO, but now with more purpose, more energy. She had started a new project, aimed at children who had lost their parents, helping them process grief in a healthy way. It was her way of transforming her own pain into something useful, something that could alleviate the suffering of others. And whenever she spoke about the project, her eyes shone in a way Richard hadn't seen in years. But not everything was rosy. There were challenges, of course. Leo, despite all his progress, still had his difficult days, moments when he would close himself off, when he would return to the corner by the window, when he seemed kilometers away even while in the living room. In these moments, Richard learned not to pressure him. He just stayed nearby, offering his silent presence. And always, without fail, Leo would return, sometimes in minutes and sometimes in hours, but he would return. It was on one of those difficult days that something important happened. Leo was in his room, lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling. He didn't want to talk, didn't want to play, didn't want to eat. Richard respected his space but stayed at the door observing. After a while, Leo spoke, without taking his eyes off the ceiling. "Dad, do you think Mommy would have liked Sylvia?" Richard felt a pang in his chest. He entered the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "I think so. Your mum wanted us to be happy, and Sylvia makes us happy, doesn't she?" Leo nodded slowly. "But sometimes I feel like I'm forgetting her. Her face, her voice, and that makes me sad." Richard lay down next to his son. "Look, Leo, it's normal to forget some details. But what you'll never forget is how she made you feel. The love she had for you, that stays forever right here." And he pointed to the boy's chest. Leo thought for a moment. "What if I forget even that?" Richard held his hand. "Then I'll remind you. Every time you need me to, I'll tell you stories about her. I'll show you photos. I'll make you remember that you were very loved and still are." Leo finally looked at his father, his eyes welling up. "Thank you." "Dad." Richard hugged him, feeling a mixture of pain and gratitude. Pain from knowing that his son would forever carry that absence. Gratitude for being there, helping him carry it. That night, during dinner, Richard made a decision. He looked at Sylvia, then at Beatrice, and finally at Leo. He announced, "I think it's time for us to take a trip, the 4 of us, somewhere new, to make new memories." Leo immediately brightened. "Where to?" Richard smiled. "I don't know yet. You help choose." And so began a planning process that took the next few weeks. They researched together, discussed options, voted. In the end, they decided on a beach on the north coast of Cornwall, a quiet place, far from mass tourism, where they could just be a family enjoying the sea and the sun. The trip was scheduled for the July holidays. Richard booked a beachfront house, spacious enough for everyone to have their own space. but cozy enough for them to be together when they wanted. Leo could barely contain his excitement. He counted the days on the calendar, made lists of what to bring, asked 1,000 times about beach details. When the day finally arrived, they left at dawn. The road was empty, the sky still dark but promising a beautiful day. Sylvia and Richard took turns driving. Beatrice and Leo dozed in the back seat. There was something magical about that moment. In how everyone was in sync, sharing the comfortable silence of those who feel at home even away from it. They arrived at the house in the middle of the afternoon. It was exactly like in the photos, simple but charming, with a large veranda that opened directly onto the sand. Leo jumped out of the car, dropped his backpack in the living room, and went straight to the beach. The adults laughed, grabbed their bags, and followed him. The sea was calm, almost without waves. Leo wet his feet, jumped, shouted with joy. Richard felt his heart overflow. How long had it been since he saw his son like this, so completely free, so utterly a child? Sylvia approached, held his hand. "It's beautiful to see him like this, isn't it?" Richard nodded, unable to speak. He just squeezed her hand, silently thanking her for everything. The days at the beach were transformative. They woke early, had breakfast together on the veranda, spent the entire day between the sea and the house, had communal dinners where everyone helped. Leo learned to build elaborate sandcastles. Beatrice discovered she enjoyed walking on the beach at dawn. Sylvia cooked new recipes, experimenting with local ingredients. And Richard, for the first time in years, didn't think about work, problems, or the past. He was just present. It was on one of those nights, after Leo had gone to sleep, that the three adults sat on the veranda with a bottle of wine. The conversation flowed naturally between laughter and comfortable silences, until Beatrice suddenly became serious. "I need to tell you something." Richard and Sylvia exchanged glances, curious. "What is it?" Beatrice took a deep breath. "I met someone, a man. He works at the NGO. He's a volunteer like me, and we've been getting close." "Very close," Sylvia smiled. "That's wonderful, Beatrice." Beatrice shook her head. "I don't know if it is. I'm scared. Scared to get involved. Scared to mess it up. Scared he'll discover my past and run away." Richard leaned forward. "Everyone has a past, Beatrice. What matters is who you are now, and you are amazing." Beatrice wiped away a tear that insisted on falling. "But what if I'm not enough? What if I disappoint him like I disappointed Isabella?" Sylvia held her hand. "You didn't disappoint Isabella. You were human. You made mistakes. But in the end, the love you had for each other was real. And that's what counts," Beatrice cried. But it was a cathartic cry. Richard and Sylvia hugged her, forming a circle of support. And there, under the starry beach sky, Beatrice allowed herself to believe that she deserved a second chance. That she deserved to be happy. The next day, she called the man. She arranged a meeting for when they returned to Cambridge, and for the first time in a long time, there was hope in her eyes when she spoke about the future. The last days at the beach passed too quickly. When it was time to leave, everyone felt a pang of sadness, but they were also renewed, as if that trip had been exactly what they needed to recharge their energies and face whatever lay ahead. On the way back, the conversation in the car was different, more lively, more full of plans. Leo talked about wanting to learn to surf. Beatrice spoke about her scheduled meeting. Sylvia mentioned wanting to take a cooking course, and Richard, listening to all of it, felt a deep gratitude for being alive, for having those people by his side, for choosing to continue even when everything seemed lost. When they arrived home, it was already night. They unloaded their luggage, showered, and had a light dinner. And before bed, Richard gathered everyone in the living room. He had something to say. "I know we've been through a lot, difficult, painful things, but looking at you all now, I realize it was worth it. Every tear, every struggle, every difficult moment, because it brought us here. It made us the family we are today." Sylvia held his hand. Richard continued, looking at each of them. "Beatrice, you came back carrying guilt and fear, but today you are an essential part of our lives. Sylvia, you came here as a nanny, but you became the heart of this home. And Leo," he looked at his son with shining eyes, You taught me that it's possible to heal, that it's possible to live again after pain. Leo stood up and hugged his father. I love you, Dad. Richard returned the hug, feeling tears fall freely. I love you too, son. More than anything. Beatrice and Sylvia joined the hug, forming a tight circle, and there, in that living room that had witnessed so much suffering, there was now only love, only hope, only the certainty that, together, they could face anything. The following days were about readapting to routine, but there was a different energy in the house. A lightness, as if everyone had finally made peace with the past and was ready to embrace the future. Beatrice had her date, and it went well. She came home with a smile that couldn't be contained, recounting every detail. The man, named Frederick Hayes, was also a widower. He had 2 teenage children, and like Beatrice, he was trying to rebuild his life. The two connected immediately, sharing stories, pains, hopes. Sylvia started her cooking course and discovered she had talent. She began making elaborate dishes for dinner, always experimenting with new recipes. The house filled with delicious smells, and Leo loved to help, getting covered in flour and sauces. Richard resumed work with renewed enthusiasm, but now with clear boundaries. He didn't bring work home. He didn't miss dinners. He didn't miss Leo's school presentations. He had learned that professional success without family to share it with meant nothing. And Leo, little Leo, continued to flourish. He made friends at school. He joined the football team. He started playing the guitar. It was as if he was making up for all the lost time, living every moment intensely, but not everything was perfect. There were still difficult days. Days when Richard woke up thinking of Isabella and felt a sharp pain in his chest. Days when Sylvia caught herself remembering Eleanor and needed to lock herself in the bathroom to cry. Days when Beatrice questioned whether she truly deserved to be happy. Days when Leo had nightmares and woke up screaming. But the difference now was that they didn't face these days alone. They were together, and together they could weather any storm. One Saturday night, almost 6 months after the trip to the beach, Richard called Sylvia for a private conversation. He took her to the garden, where he had prepared a surprise. There were candles scattered, flowers, soft music playing. Sylvia was speechless. Richard, "What is this?" He smiled, nervous. "This is a request, or rather a question." And then, in a scene that seemed straight out of a movie, Richard knelt. "Sylvia, you came into my life when I was completely lost. You brought my son back. You brought me back, and now I can't imagine a single day without you." He took a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. "Will you marry me? Will you make official what our hearts have known for a long time?" Sylvia cried, but they were tears of pure joy. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Richard placed the ring on her finger and pulled her into a kiss. At the upstairs window, Leo and Beatrice watched everything, also crying, also happy. The news spread quickly. Richard's friends were surprised but happy. Sylvia's colleagues from the old daycare congratulated her warmly. And Leo, oh Leo. He couldn't stop telling everyone at school that there was going to be a party because his dad was getting married. The wedding was scheduled for 3 months later, a small, intimate ceremony with only the closest people, in the house itself, in the garden where Richard had proposed. It would be simple, but full of meaning. And while the preparations unfolded, life continued. Beatrice deepened her relationship with Frederick. Leo continued to grow and develop. And Richard and Sylvia built, day after day, brick by brick, the solid foundation of a family that, though born of pain, was now pure love,